Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining the third Bidwell's webinar. My name is Richard Todd. I'm the head of the Oxford office from Bidwell's. For those of you that aren't aware, Bidwell's is a 181 years old property consultancy firm. I'm very proud of that. From an Oxford perspective, it's about 10 years old really now. And my key focus is one of the partners in the building consultancy team. And we've been growing the team over the last 5 years or so there now. Primarily, it's been supporting the education sector. We're privileged to be supporting 2/3 of the Oxford colleges and the university, and actually some significant science and technology clients as well. But over the last few years, there's been a significant demand and drive and natural diversification towards supporting science and technology. That's supporting principal clients like Harwell or the Oxford Sciences Innovation and a number of their spin-outs. But from my perspective, what we're truly seeing now is the benefits of this triple helix model, seeing industry, academia and government coming together. Equally, what I'm quite passionate about is I don't think this is championed, and that sort of joint venturing at the outset with those triple strands that I mentioned. So I'm keen to discuss champion that further because it's a remarkable transformation that's happening at the moment. So thanks for joining this third webinar. Just by summary, the first webinar we looked at whether the green belt was choking the green economic growth. We had input from the Professor of Environmental Assessment at Cranfield and good debate from Estelle, who is the Chief Exec at Buckinghamshire and Oxford Wildlife Trust. In the second webinar, we looked at whether the right balance was being struck between the local policy making and the build pace, with constructive and informative input from the ARC Leadership Group, LEP, Oxford Cambridge ARC Portfolio Director from CHLG. Here at the third webinar, we're going to be looking particularly at academia and science and technology. We're going to be discussing the collaboration between the university and the private sector, the value of the ARC, and attracting investment. So I'm really delighted to welcome some excellent panelists today. By way of introduction, we have Peter Gregson, who we're really proud to have joined our panel. Peter's the chair of the ARC Universities Group. He was chair of the Milton Keynes 2050 Futures Commission. He's director of the South East Midlands LEP and serves on the Oxford Cambridge ARC Leaders Group. Accompanying Peter, we have Matt Perkins, who's the CEO of Oxford University Innovation. He was also ex-CEO of Surrey Satellite Technology and the past chair of UK Space. Joining Matt and Peter is Leslie Thompson. Leslie is the VP of Academia and Government Relations UK. She's also part of the RELEX Group and formerly Research Director at EPSRC, who are the largest UK research funder. Leslie's also chair of the OxLEP Innovation Board. Finally on the panel is my colleague Holly Dawson. Holly's the head of Bidwell's Milton Keynes office. Holly's on a mission to help cement the city's place at the heart of the knowledge economy. Her principal focus is on business space agency, specializing in office and R&D space, with her colleagues across the ARC, helping to unlock the potential of science and technology space. So we're going to open with a presentation from Peter, and we'll move into a panel discussion and debate. And we do encourage you to chip any questions that you have, and we'll answer them as we go through the debate, or I'll try and sweep up any questions at the end. Matt, who's supporting me very well in the background, will also answer any questions that you may have to keep this as informative as possible. So I'd like to welcome Peter, if I can.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Richard, and let me add my words of welcome to everybody on this webinar today. It's a great privilege and pleasure for me to join you, and by way of starting the presentation, let me just say that the ARC was originally conceived by the National Infrastructure Commission. It's then been taken up, and the lead is through MHCLG, so that's the government department lead. But as we'll see in my presentation as we go on, the importance of BEIS as well in all of this. The In the early days, there was a request from MHCLG that the universities across the ARC meet together and explore whether there are opportunities for greater working together to underpin the development of the ARC. We did that very rapidly and developed the ARC Universities Group with a prospectus that's been widely circulated some while ago now. So that's the basis of the Universities Working to Group and the ARC Universities Group. I think it's fair to say, and I see it from the governance perspective, that the LETs have across the ARC have taken up the challenge of providing the leadership in terms of local leadership. The 4 LEPs are working very closely together and launched their respective responses to the government's industrial strategy. And that really has underpinned some of the developments ongoing in the ARC. And the LEPs have been behind the development of an executive leaders group chaired by Councillor Barry Wood and incorporating the executive director of the ARC, Bev Hindle. So all of that has happened in the background, and out of that, there has been the development of an innovation prospectus, which I'll be drawing on strongly in this presentation, that was submitted to the early stages of what we then thought was going to be a traditional comprehensive spending review. Of course, it isn't, but the work goes on nevertheless. And I'm going to highlight some of the work of that in this presentation. So if I could have the next slide, please, Matt. There have been lots of things said about the ARC, right from the early stages of the National Infrastructure Commission work, but probably bringing us up to date is the current Chancellor of the Exchequer in March last year, when he referred to this area as an area of national economic significance. I think it's really important that we cling to that, because that defines for us both the way in which the ARC can develop, but also the way in which it can develop and contribute to national development and the various government priorities that are laid out by the government. So as some key points, we've got 9 universities across the ARC that are working together. We work together with business in our own area and beyond. We work with different government departments, and increasingly it's to support inclusive and sustainable economic growth. That's both within the ARC and beyond, because of the businesses that we work with that exist within and beyond the ARC. One of the ways that I like to describe it is that we are in this ARC pulling together the extraordinary brands of Oxford and Cambridge, together with the other universities across the region. All universities have a global outlook, especially the research-intensive universities of Oxford, Cambridge, and Cranfield. And what we're about is harnessing global talent for both regional and national advantage. I think in a nutshell, that's what I hope that I'll be able to demonstrate today. And that therefore contributes to a number of different agendas, whether it's the government levelling up agenda, whether it's economic recovery from the current COVID crisis within our region, or whatever. I hope that you'll see that because of the innovation strength of this region, this ARC does provide an outstanding offer for inward investment. You'll see that in some of what I say, but I'm sure it's some of the stuff that we'd like to pick up later on. So if you could go on to the next slide, please. A very busy slide, and I only really want to use it for geographical purposes, if I can put it like that, and to make a few comments. I've just mentioned inward investment. So if you just look at that slide, that inward investment takes very many different forms across that slide. So just picking on 3 examples, and I'm going to start with Cambridge here. I'll refer later on, but also now, to the huge investment that AstraZeneca has made in Cambridge, and particularly on the Addenbrooke site. If I go to the East End and think at Oxford, there are many examples of Oxford, from Oxford Scientific Innovation to the Energy Systems Accelerator. They are all ways in which we bring in inward investment. So too is the Aerospace Integration Centre at Cranfield, drawing in multinational investment from the aviation sector. So what I want to do is to use this slide to talk about some of the building blocks that I believe are important at this stage. The first point I want to say is that we're building on existing networks. This is not something out of the ether. If again, I'll go the other way around this time, let's start at the East and at Oxford. Extraordinary network associated with the life sciences in and close to Oxford. Likewise, the Space Gateway there. Moving to the right-hand end, again, extraordinary strength in the life sciences at Cambridge and other business networks that are all working well. And what we're trying to do is to build on those. And if I can draw your attention in the middle of this diagram to the business of sustainable aviation, I think that Cranfield and the partnerships around Cranfield, which include Oxford and Cambridge, have a world-leading capability in that area. Looking a bit north, clearly there are huge developments around Silverstone and Northampton, and that's important. So too are the aviation and university links in Luton. So innovation is about a sustained commitment to the development and the growth of businesses. And the 9 universities illustrated on the bottom of this slide are working together to support both innovation and skills development across the arc. It's early days, but there is growing collaboration with that goal. Just looking at innovation, and one dimension of that being the spin-out agenda. So on the left-hand side and on the top left, you'll see some statistics from Oxford Science Innovation. They are 4 years of data ending 2019. So they're not directly comparable with the data that I'm using for Cambridge on the right-hand side of the diagram. But I just want to use these 2 sets of data to pull out some key emphasis on scale. So this is OSI on the left and Cambridge Enterprises on the right. Both universities have now got to a level of spinning out about 30 companies per annum. These are potentially high growth, high potential, high tech companies. You'll also see on the left-hand side that the amount of follow-on funding attracted by a period between now and 2025 for both universities is between 2 and 3 billion pounds. So the scale of this element of innovation is huge and growing rapidly. And you'll see that on the next slide, but don't go there yet, please, Matt. I'd also like to point out that, of course, in the middle of this arc is Milton Keynes, one of the fastest growing cities in the UK, and one of the top 4 in terms of the growth of startup companies and the density of companies and businesses developing within the region. So whether it's high-tech companies spinning out of universities or startups growing within our region, this is a truly unique arc, and one for which the opportunities for innovation are huge. It's really important that we seize them, because we need to maintain this talent within the arc. We need to support the growth of companies and do so in an inclusive and sustainable way. Next slide, please. So a slide from Oxford, we could do the same from Cambridge, just to indicate that this is not something new. This timeline goes back to 1959, a series of sporadic developments of spin-out companies really accelerating in the past decade. And that's the opportunity to harness. So if we go to the next slide, please. I mentioned the notion of growth in an inclusive and sustainable way. There's a really cross-cutting strength in environment, and a will and desire both from business, from universities, and of course from government, both local politicians and national, to develop this as a green arc. There's some work being done, and there's now a report bringing together the work of the Environment Partnership Board that exists across the arc, bringing together universities, government, local councillors and business. What is been happening here is that body, the partnership body, has been drawing together the three pillars here: quality education, enhancing the environment, and thriving economic and community, using those as three pillars to link together with the United Nations 17 global sustainability goals. Partnership and governance is, of course, the fourth strand about how we work. This is, again, becoming well established, and I'm going to go to the next slide and ask to play the video on that slide, please.
The thing that will make the Oxford-Cambridge arc distinctive and will really make us stand out is if we put the green economic agenda at its very heart. The universities in the arc have a world-leading environment capability.
It's that engagement with the universities which will allow us to really capture all this emerging best practice.
Skills, innovation, research and training.
The environment has to be the overarching umbrella over all the ARC's ambition.
I'm really hoping the ARC will be a major contribution to the green economy.
The challenge is to bring everybody together.
I'm really excited. It's got the opportunity to be a powerhouse of innovation in the highest quality environment in the world.
And it is a model that we can share with the rest of the world on how to do it right.
Can you move on to the next slide, please, Matt? So if you like, there's a golden thread around the green arc, and we might come back to that in Q&As. I mentioned earlier on the prospectus that's been developed jointly between the LETS and the Executive Leaders Group, and that's had a lot of input from the ARC Universities Group. There are a number of projects in there. Three I just want to mention briefly now. There is, as I've already highlighted, a really strong life sciences network local to both Oxford and Cambridge, and we see that in very sharp prominence in the way that these areas are leading the research and the vaccination programs against COVID. But of course, the challenge is to make sure that the life sciences network can continue to develop. And so this is an immediate priority, and to consolidate, the ARC's position within the world. Clearly, it's Oxford and Cambridge, but we need other laboratories, wet labs, and what have you across the region if the people that are supporting the heart of developments in Oxford and Cambridge are to be supported and be able to live and work in this region. And there are conversations ongoing right now, today, about some new opportunities for supporting that life sciences network across the ARC. The Space Gateway is clearly one that I've also already mentioned. And so I'm going to close by saying a word or two about sustainable aviation, which is another project that is becoming more well developed. And if I can go to the next slide, just highlight that, again, this very much led by the aviation experts across the ARC, has developed the notion of the Oxford-Cambridge ARC Virtual Institute. It's bringing together huge strengths in a number of different areas. So you'll see here, clearly there's the Thermofluids Institute and the Energy Systems Accelerator that I've already mentioned at Oxford. There's the Cranfield Aerospace Integration Research Centre and the Digital Aviation Research and Technology Centre. And there's the Whittle Lab at Cambridge, all world-leading opportunities. And there are increasing links now into them from some of the other universities, including Anglia Ruskin and Bucks New University, and then exploiting some of the other strengths in the region, like TWI and Luton Airport. So this is one where there is a clear vision emerging for the future, an order of scale. We believe that over the next 10, 15 years, something like 500 new companies, some of them are already forming on the aviation catapult or acceleration center at Cranfield, 10,000 new jobs, and very much part of the Jet Zero initiative launched by the Prime Minister. And I'm going to conclude by a video that just illustrates some of the work and the ambition of people across the ARC in this area. Please go on to the next slide and its video.
This is a really exciting time.
Yeah, we really are on the cusp of a technology revolution.
The changes we're looking at now are complete changes in configuration.
To retain society's trust, we have to aim at net zero.
We have some of the best businesses in the UK.
Aviation is a key sector in the UK's economy and particularly focused around this area.
If you look at the region, you look at Oxford, Cambridge, Cranfield, there's some fantastic capability, some fantastic opportunities. We're seeing the challenges of Brexit, we're seeing the challenges of COVID, we're seeing the challenges of sustainability.
Where we're going next is we've got to make the UK targets of zero emissions by 2050.
If we can bring together research opportunities and the minds of the entrepreneurs in this area.
New technologies, new materials, autonomy, new energy sources, electric aircraft, hydrogen fuel cells, sustainable aviation fuel.
If we're going to rapidly decarbonise flight and power generation, we're going to have to dramatically change both the culture and the tools we use.
There's really nowhere else in the world that this innovation and research can happen.
For the last 50 years, we've been a major industrial partner with Rolls-Royce, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Siemens, and more recently Dyson.
500 million would see the UK being at the very heart of a future global aviation sector.
A lot of work is already underway, and that with a bit more investment from the government, from the private sector, we really can start to tackle that challenge of net zero flight.
The opportunity for the UK to remain at the very heart of the aviation industry is there now.
Create investment, create wealth, create jobs.
You can use this arc as the gateway into the academic research, the research universities from across the UK.
To grow and flourish, and will enable that prosperity to be spread across the whole of the UK.
The great thing is that the industry is starting to accept that we need to solve these problems, and we can do it.
And unlock the economic potential, unlock the solutions to meet the sustainability goals. It's there.
Thanks very much indeed, Richard.
Thank you, Peter. That's brilliant. And if I can invite my colleagues to turn their cameras on as well, that'd be great. I think there are some questions that have come in, and we'll get to those in a moment. So there's a question in from Fiona and from Jill. So we will get to those, and it'll give my colleagues a chance to look at those. But I mean, Peter, that presentation is just, you know, it's not only the level of the innovation revolution, it's not just awe-inspiring, it's just a constant reminder of something that we must capitalize on. I'd like to bring in Leslie on that note, really, and ask Leslie, you know, how can the ARC fuel international inward investment to help scale up the startup R&D businesses across the region from a national value perspective?
Okay. Thank you, Richard, and what a great opportunity this is. I'm inspired already. So firstly, it's been a rather dreadful January, but actually there are lots of reasons to be cheerful. And one example is this event today, but more fully is the collaboration across this ARC region. From the bookends of Cambridge and Oxford and all the universities along this sweep, there's a world-renowned focus on research and innovation. All the universities have a can-do attitude and work seamlessly with business of all sizes and flavours. I, for instance, represent a global business, Elsevier. We have nearly 1,000 people based in Oxford, and we collaborate with universities across the ARC, particularly in data analytics and AI, but we also recruit talent, and that's our biggest limitation, from across the ARC universities. And that's really important to keep us anchored. When we have choices of being positioned anywhere in the world, Oxford is a preferred location for us. If you look at the UK research and innovation landscape, it's unrecognisable from probably 25 years ago when I met Sir Peter for the first time. Then I worked for a funding agency, and 4% of the research grants that they made were in collaboration with business. Today, that's in excess of 50%. And the quality of UK research, as benchmarked by the reports that Elsevier regularly does for the UK government, has got stronger over that period. So working with industry has not negated research quality. In fact, it's enhanced it. And I think we've seen that with the examples Peter's given today. When Microsoft, and I was just reflecting on this ARC, when Microsoft in 1997 decided to open its research labs, the first one outside the US, there were real questions on what benefit would accrue to the UK. If I look now, you wouldn't even consider asking that question. Microsoft has enhanced not only Cambridge, but the whole of the UK research and innovation system. And you can see that with corporates around the country, and particularly the corporates that have investments in the UK. This is just a natural benefit to have this close integration of universities and business, large and small. But now turning to startups and scale up. The ARC across its sweep, and I like the word sweep because I think that describes the ARC much better than a powerhouse or an engine. It's a sweep. It has a very vibrant startup culture. It has an ecosystem that attracts investment from across the globe, but could attract more. It has excellence and breadth in research and know-how, and most importantly, great people and a growing reputation across the Arc. To scale up faster, I think all the elements are in place and it's infectious. But just as we need to spread the infection faster and to promote the region in all of its assets and innovation, we need to find those super spreader events or those super spreader investments. I think the prospectus that we've got and the willingness of universities to work together is absolutely infectious. And with the willpower and the collaboration across the sector, this will be an asset not just for the region, it's an asset for the country. And it has a global position that's growing more and more. And colleagues around the world that work in Elsevier are always amazed when they see the strength of research and innovation we have in this region. And I think I'd just like to lend my power to making this happen faster and quicker. Great.
Thanks, Leslie. Matt, we've just had a note in from Greg Bays-Brown, who's commented on Peter's slide that's constantly out of date based on the level of rapid growth, confirming that he's just collected all deals for OUI supported companies in 2020, and they're over the £1 billion for the calendar year. So already a third of the way to the 2025 target, which is just phenomenal. Matt, can I ask you to just pick up on what Leslie said, please, from OUI's perspective?
Definitely. Obviously, I'll concentrate on the innovation element and the commercialization element of the ARC's activities. We have two universities end stopping the ARC who are part of a group of 6 who do the vast majority of all commercial activity for returning finance back to universities for commercialization of their intellectual property in Oxford and Cambridge. There is plenty of scope for many other universities to get heavily involved in achieving much bigger returns as well. What are investors looking for, particularly ones who want to invest and scale up? They're looking for great ideas. They're looking for talented, creative management teams that can grow companies and deliver huge scale quite quickly. As you've just heard from the comment from Greg, more than £1 billion of inward investment into spin-outs created by Oxford University in the last 12 months. And that's in the context of the pandemic, where we all thought many companies would go to the wall. In actual fact, they have seen a substantial increase in investment. So the opportunities for doing that are there, but it's all about having great ideas, more universities generating more spin-out companies, having an infrastructure in place to enable those companies to be able to grow, having investors close to, ideally co-located. One of the strengths of Oxford is that we have Oxford Sciences Innovation based in Oxford itself. So the link between the academic researchers who are coming up with the great ideas and the investors who want to put money into those ideas is very tight and therefore very rapid in response when new ideas come through. So having the talent to manage the companies, having the great ideas available, having the investors close by, having the infrastructure to support this growth is also equally important. We know that the challenges around people's living spaces in Oxford and Cambridge regions are really limited. Finding ways to be able to improve that to attract more talent and having large enough ecosystems which can be self-seeding and self-supporting so that you get great talent in to manage startup companies and they can recycle a number of times. Cambridge have been good at that. Oxford is getting better at that now. Now we have a larger scale ecosystem. So the two ends of the arc are working well in this regard, but there's plenty of scope with other universities in between, and making sure we have a good understanding of what the investors want to see and the relationships with industry. That triple helix model is absolutely vital. A great example is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, where the combination of fantastic world-leading research by Oxford academics, government support, and AstraZeneca as the big industrial partner coming in to get the vaccine out there and being used. And ultimately, that's what we're about. We just have to find ways of being able to do that when we're not in the middle of a crisis as well. But having a crisis is a great way for spurring on innovation, and that's been amply demonstrated over the last 12 months.
Thanks, Matt. Brilliant. Now, I'd like to bring in Holly next. Holly's got the benefit of running our MK office, so slap bang in the middle of the arc. And something that was clear from Peter's video was that this isn't just, the arc isn't just a strand holding two nuclei together at Oxford and Cambridge. This really is, you know, an arc where we need innovation development across the entire length and breadth of that investment. Can you let us know, Holly, you know, what things are like on the ground in Milton Keynes and any disconnect between perhaps vision and reality?
Yeah, so good afternoon to everyone. I mean, it is clear to see that the knowledge intensive industries are dominating activity across the arc. More so this year, given the accelerated demand for the research facilities in the face of COVID. I mean, just broad brush across the arc before we go on to MK, 87% of take up in Oxford, 59% of take up in MK, and 90% of take up in Cambridge. And there are, of course, different synergies and different clusters, which Peter ran us through in his presentation in those three principal locations. Now, our Bidwell's research estimates that there is approximately 19 million square feet of academic research and institute R&D space across the arc, with then a further 20 million square feet of private sector space, commercial space on science and tech parks. And we've heard about the growth, and with that growth and with those spin outs, of course, comes the need for expansion. And that's possibly where we are seeing, I think, a bit of a disconnect at the moment in terms of the delivery of the right space at pace to accommodate that growth. And perhaps a little bit of a juxtaposition between the demands of institutional property investors seeking, you know, longer term commitments than perhaps those younger spin out companies can perhaps offer. So it's about offering the right mix of space, type of space, which can be underpinned by the strong covenants of the multinationals, and therefore creating the collaboration and the feed and the sharing of knowledge within those environments. Now, talked, as we've said, about the bookends of Oxford and Cambridge, Milton Keynes being pivotal there, Cranfield and Milton Keynes University coming online there is really the growth story. And I think the spin outs as a result of that will therefore generate more demand. And we are starting now to see investor appetite in terms of delivering that right space, the mixed use, and we've got some exciting projects coming online to support that. The redevelopment of Saxon Court by First Base, and the reawakening of Bletchley Park, for example.
Great, thanks, Holly. That's really informative. I'd like to come back to Peter. Peter, I'm particularly struck by what's been said, and it's been mentioned by yourself and Matt already. From my perspective, despite the pioneering and transformational joint venturing, you know, that can be seen with the likes of AstraZeneca in Cambridge, OSI in Oxford, Rolls-Royce in Nottingham, for example, you know, I'm still concerned that at a property level, there's still a landlord and tenant culture, and we're not really capitalizing on the benefit of a JV at the outset and capitalizing on that triple helix model that Matt mentioned. Can you just respond to that?
Well, I don't think I can speak for the other organizations that you've referred to, but actually I would certainly challenge the landlord/tenant relationship that you've just mentioned. Certainly at Cranfield, it's a bit the journey that we're on that Leslie referred to. I have to say that, you know, the partnerships, the co-investments and what have you, I talk about co-creation and co-investment. It's not, we move beyond landlord-tenant relationship. And I'd be surprised if some of the others that you've mentioned aren't feeling the same way. That's the direction of travel. Of course, in some areas, it's probably more well developed than others. But certainly, you know, if I pick up on the examples that I chose of the company investments in aviation at Cranfield, they are all co-creation, co-investment opportunities. and they're all held at a very high strategic level within the university and within the company, board level in both institutions.
Thank you. I've got the questions are filling up quite quickly, so I might try and bring some of these in so we don't lose track of time. There's a question in from Sylvia Lazzarini here asking about how real estate developers can help to support the growth and investment in the ARC, and are funding and developments equally important? Can I put that to perhaps Peter and Holly to start with?
Yes, I think that comes back to the delivery and the balancing and getting the right spaces to cater for demand. The collaboration space is critical, the in-between spaces, the public realm spaces, and bringing in those mixed-use schemes. And I think we've also got to start looking towards how the differing trends perhaps with where people live, where people work, where they shop, the lifestyle to create those locations that companies want to locate and relocate to.
Okay, thanks, Holly. And just perhaps just sticking with Holly, Matt, there's I might just go back to what I said earlier about not losing sight of the entire route between Oxford and Cambridge. How do you think the universities can make the research and innovation in the middle of the ARC more attractive to investors?
There's a number of questions that need to be answered. How strongly and well are the academic communities in the other universities incentivized to do this type of activity? Is there an entrepreneurial culture developing in each of those? If there is, you will naturally see great ideas coming out. It's a question then of having the support services around you in terms of the appropriate financial advisors, solicitors, real estate developers, etc., all being there to be able to put you into places where you can see those companies grow. Having proximity to investors we found has been extremely important, and I think the ARC has that benefit right the way along. So there is no reason why Milton Keynes or Northampton or other areas can't be easily accessed by London-based investors. Of course, that's the first point, but we want to see inward investment from outside of the UK as well. So good transport links are absolutely critical to be able to achieve that as well. But you've got to get talent in the first place as well. The talent has to be there to not only come up with the great ideas, but also to lead the companies. And one thing that we've spent a lot of time on working, particularly with OSI in Oxford, has been how do we identify the right talent? How do we get the right talent in who are good at the startup phase and who are good at the scale-up phase? And making sure we get those transitions and providing new opportunities by the scale of spin-out creation, so that people can move from one of those roles into another role, retain that experience, retain that contact network within the ecosystem, and therefore help grow it. And we'd love to see that shared more widely around the whole of the ARC. There's no reason why we can't. Many of the universities have complementary skills. So Oxford is a very strong science foundation. Cambridge has done a great job with slightly more engineering focus. Cranfield very clearly a very strong engineering focus. Each one of those will generate different types of companies with different gestation periods. And it's really important that we have that variety to be able to offer investors in the future so that they can choose the right point at which they want to put money in. Thanks, Matt.
I think on the investment and private and public sector, there's something there just to keep challenging. Perhaps if I could ask Leslie first, and then Peter to further comment on. Leslie, could you just touch on the traditional model of universities seeking private sector funding and that shift, and then perhaps Peter, you can follow and just talk about what happens if the government can't actually support this sheer growth and requirement.
So I don't see that traditional model operating very often anymore in the UK. I think the days when industry or private sector was seen as the bad guys is just not there anymore. There's a natural desire to collaborate and work together. And I think you see that everywhere where universities are, There are now people on board positions of all universities that are responsible for industrial partnerships. That's not for any other reason than actually this matters to universities. And for sure, if we're going to see the UK government continue to invest in R&D in the UK and hit its target of 3% by 2027, then the thing that's got to grow is the industrial R&D, not the government funded R&D. That's a really big ask, but a place like the Arc is absolutely set up for that. Just to add one other thing, and it's always been a frustration of mine trying to promote academic government, academic industrial collaboration, the design of space. So whether it's interdisciplinary research or whether it's corporate academic relationships, the space is an interesting issue. And it is starting to change, but actually there are some wonderful buildings around the world that really work for this collaboration. And for me, this call to work with Bidwells was really interesting because it's the first time I've had that sort of touch point with people who are really expert at thinking about some of those issues. But space makes a huge difference to the efficiency of collaborations. And I think that's something that is well worth thinking about.
Thanks, Leslie. Peter, did you have a chance to follow?
Well, perhaps there are 2 points that I just make. One following on from Leslie and using the space hook, if I can put it like that. I do think there are things that universities are now doing to make their search, their work much more public.
Yeah.
And that has, that takes time. And I think, across the board, certainly from when I joined Cranfield, that was one of the points that I made when I took the job at Cranfield. I said that, there's no point in having a hidden gem somewhere between Oxford and Cambridge. Nobody needs hidden gems nowadays. We need to make sure that the public, society, know what's going on. There are a few important things that need to be linked together. So universities need to become increasingly open in that. I think universities need to work in an open and transparent way with business. And like Leslie, I've been passionate about university business collaborations the whole of my career. But the other part that needs to be brought in here is the whole area of local government, because space requires planning. And far too often in the past, when it has been regarded as a sequential operation, there's a lot of upfront work, and then space and the drag on planning means that people go elsewhere. Quick moving companies will go elsewhere. But it's starting to come together. And one of the examples that I would choose is one that's very much in the news at the moment. It's ZeroAvia. You've seen it. It's a Californian high-tech entrepreneurial company. They came to Cranfield to do the world's first hydrogen electric, so that's a hydrogen fueled fuel cell, 6-seater aircraft. Just before Christmas, they got 30-odd million pounds of funding for an 18-seater aircraft, and that's right on our doorstep here. Entrepreneurs from California. I was on the phone with them yesterday evening because some of them haven't got back to Cranfield from California, others have. And that only happens because people are now working in the same time scale as the entrepreneurs that we need to be able to work with. So I think there's a really great opportunity for that. I think the old models are completely gone. Leslie's absolutely right. And I think that, within the ARC, we should continue to push for government commitment through the CSR. Government identified this region. A lot of people have gone at risk. The amount of work the universities are doing is all at risk at the moment. We need to make sure that that is embedded, government makes commitment, and I'm absolutely certain that any government commitment in this ARC will be more than repaid by the amount of private sector investment coming on the back of it.
Thanks, Peter. I'm hoping some of these comments are picking up. There's a question about universities and developers from Peter, which I'm hoping your response, Peter, touched on. There's a question in from Hugh Blazer about the landlord and tenant culture. And I think, Hugh, what we're seeing and what's being demonstrated today is the the intention and the commitment to join up at the outset and be part of a much bigger picture is what's at the heart of the changing landlord and tenant culture. And there's so many awful connotations of this landlord and tenants, and actually what the examples that we referred to earlier on in this show, with the likes of OSI and in Keble, for example, or Rolls-Royce and Nottingham, is, you know, these aren't landlord-tenant considerations. They're structuring themselves as a JV to respond to a much bigger picture. Just conscious of time, I'd like to touch on a question for Matt. The question come in: what should the ARC science parks of the future look like? You've got a minute or two to answer this one, but off the top of your head, a few things that you'd like to see.
Well, I would rather focus on innovations districts rather than science parks. Science parks are fantastic for being able to provide a home for companies to be able to grow, develop and scale. Those are brilliant, but actually we need that close-knit collaboration, cooperation between students learning about entrepreneurship skills and developing company growing skills. Research work which is fully supported by industrial partners co-located in the same facility. Startup companies being created as a result in that location as well. And ideally, if you could, accommodation for many of those people to be able to live in that particular region. That's the sort of mindset that we're thinking about here at Oxford now. And we think that will generate much more of a cohesive innovation-based activity. A great example is Kendall Square over in the US, where you've got all of the major pharma players around the world, all co-located within a mile, and MIT's there right in the very middle. And the output that's been generated by that small ecosystem has been fantastic. We want to see something similar here in Oxford. And we're seeing that. We have the advantage of Milton Park, we have the advantage of Harwell, but we're seeing more and more of that, where we need to bring these organizations together and make sure they speak the same language and understand each other. And that's one of the challenges that we still have at Oxford, making sure that appetite for risk between the university and industrial partners is aligned sufficiently that we can get good partnerships and collaborations out of it. So I'm all for innovation districts, please.
Thanks, Matt. Peter, just trying to pick off perhaps a couple of last questions before I do a summary. There's a question here from Claire at Wilmot Dixon, and she's asking about the ARC framework and the supply chain, bringing the supply chain in to start helping not just collaborate at a research and investment level, but to collaborate on a technical implementation level. What discussions have there been to date about preferred suppliers who will actually be responsible for implementing these developments?
I think it's a really good question, and it's an area that we're probably, as universities, not as good sometimes as working with supply chain companies as we are with the big primes. But I think that culture is changing. I think that has to be done by sector. So, you know, what works for the construction sector is going to be very different from that works for the aerospace sector or the agri-tech sector. So the challenge is right. We must bring in the supply chains and the medium-sized companies within them, but there's work still to be done there.
Thank you, because I think there are supply chains in place already for a number of the universities that are part of the ARC group. So it'd be remiss not to take some guidance for them. But Matt's also mentioning developments as good precedents that sit outside of the UK that we should be also understanding, not just from a research and a collaboration point of view, but actually technically what worked well and what lessons could have been learned from its implementation. I think, just very conscious of time, I might just try and collate a few of our points that we've discussed today and just ask you all a final thought. So you know that I'm particularly passionate about the continued championing of inward investment and retaining the academic and the research excellence that we've got across the ARC. We've got the nucleus of growth and talent, certainly demonstrated obviously in Cambridge and in Oxford, but we need to consider the boosting the inward investment and the collaboration, the strategy and the vision across the ARC, not just at either end. Matt touched on science campuses and actually thinking much more about them from a clustering perspective in innovation society. We're not just talking about landlords and tenants, and estates and science buildings. We're talking about continued prosperity, growth, excellence, innovation, sustainability, good quality of life, and education needs to be at the heart of that as well. Perhaps I could get a final comment from each of you in terms of what stuck with you today, and what are you still chomping at the bit for? Can I start with you, Leslie?
Yeah. So I think the thing that makes this all happen are people. And I think the art could most helpfully do is to find innovative ways to encourage more movement between the stakeholders, because people moving and understanding each other's cultures will make things go faster. So let's reward the brave souls that are prepared to jump across a triple helix. And I would include in that people from real estate companies. I think that would be really inspirational.
Thank you, Leslie. And over to you, Holly.
Yeah, so bringing the real estate sector together, I think is absolutely key in delivering those mixed use schemes that are close to the skill sets and retain workforce. Bit of a shameless plug, the Radical Regeneration Manifesto that Bidwells have put out recently, just touching on what we can do in science parks, perhaps incorporating further education into those science parks. So getting that merging of the academic links there.
Thank you. And over to you, Matt.
For me, ecosystems of this nature grow organically, and it's very hard to control them. So we shouldn't even try to control them. We should try and make as many connections as we possibly can. The other bit that we really need to focus on is what are the communication messages coming out of the whole ARC ecosystem. Getting those out there, the positive news stories, will only help attract more inward investment. So making sure there's a good mechanism for making that happen. It's always a challenge. We have exactly the same challenge in Oxford at the moment, but we are actively focused on finding ways of getting better communications about the successes coming from the Oxford ecosystem, and we should look at exactly the same for the whole of the ARC ecosystem.
Thank you, Matt. And Peter?
So going back to my earlier words about co-creation and co-investment, I think it's about people and the partnerships. Leslie's spoken about the people. I think we need to work then on the partnerships to make sure that they are very much creative for the future. I think if something could come out that's expanding the links between real estate and industry and government and universities, that would be tremendous. I'm always talking about universities, business and government working together, but I think this is where there's an opportunity for new co-creation, co-investment.
Thank you, Peter. I think from my perspective, we're incredibly fortunate to be working at, in the heart of Cambridge, in the heart of Milton Keynes, and in the heart of Oxford on some significant transformational developments. It's a privileged opportunity, and it's great to be at the heart of it. The bit that continues to grind me is we are at the heart of such transformational developments and strategic vision, and we continue to be slightly shy about it. And I really think we need to work a lot harder across consultancies to collectively promote what we're doing already, because part of that continued championing of what we're already realizing will help inward investment. So thank you very much to my panelists, Peter, Leslie, Matt and Holly. Thanks everybody for listening. Matt, I think we've just got a quick slide just to remind everybody about the next webinar. So all these webinars are recorded on the Bidwells website, so you can watch them at your heart's content. Unfortunately, we haven't managed to get to Vicky or Simon or Omar's questions on the basis that they've been on the chart for a while. I might say if Matt, we can get a response on the website below those, soon as they were unanswered. But Matt, when is our next webinar? It's on the 17th of Feb, 12 till 1. Same process as joining this one. So thank you very much to everybody. We hope to see you then, and thanks for your time. Stay safe.